Somewhere in North Korea right now, someone is watching a South Korean drama on a USB drive hidden inside their mattress. They know what happens if they get caught, and yet they watch it anyway. That's it. That is the whole story. Because when people stop being afraid, when they decide the risk of living is worth more than the safety of obedience, no surveillance state on Earth can hold the line. Not forever. North Korea built the most controlled country in human history. 3 generations, total isolation. A population that was supposed to have no idea the outside world even existed. And it's unraveling, quietly, irreversibly, one USB drive at a time. We're going to show you exactly how and why Kim Jong-un may already be too late to stop it. For decades, North Korea looked like the perfect dictatorship. Not just a brutal one, but a structurally airtight one. The regime controlled food, employment, movement, and information simultaneously. Every citizen was assigned a political classification at birth, a Songbun ranking, determining what jobs they could hold, where they could live, and whether their entire family would be punished if they stepped out of line. At the center of this machine sat the Organization and Guidance Department, the OGD, which operated as the regime's invisible nervous system. Surveillance at every level. Workplace committees reporting on colleagues. Neighborhood units reporting on neighbors. Political prison camps holding an estimated 1.9 million people, where entire families were imprisoned together under a system of collective punishment designed to make individual defiance feel suicidal. This system was not just repressive, it was engineered to make resistance feel impossible. Not just physically, but psychologically. From the outside, it worked. For 78 years, the Kim dynasty survived everything the world threw at it. War, famine, sanctions, the collapse of every comparable regime on Earth. Western analysts predicted North Korea's imminent collapse so many times that the predictions almost became a running joke. But here's the thing about systems built on total control. They don't adapt, and when they can't adapt, they start to break. The real cracks didn't begin when the Soviet Union fell. They began earlier, quietly, in 1974, when Kim Il-sung made a decision that revealed the fatal flaw at the heart of the North Korean economic model. Faced with a stagnating industrial base, the regime decided to buy its way into modernity. They placed orders worth hundreds of millions of dollars with Western companies, mining equipment, manufacturing technology, and yes, 1,000 Volvo automobiles from Sweden. The Swedish government, seeing what they thought was an untapped market, backed the deal with export credits. The Volvos arrived, but the payment never did. North Korea defaulted almost immediately. The debt, still unpaid today, now stands at over $322 million, including interest, one of the most absurd outstanding financial obligations in modern history. A sovereign state that still owes Sweden for cars that it ordered 50 years ago. But it wasn't just embarrassing, it was diagnostic. The moment North Korea defaulted on Western creditors, it was locked out of global financial markets permanently. While South Korea leveraged foreign capital to build one of the most remarkable economic transformations of the 20th century, the North was forced to turn to drug trafficking, counterfeiting, and illicit trade just to keep the lights on. The gears had already started seizing, but the worst was still coming. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, North Korea lost its primary economic lifeline almost overnight. Soviet subsidies vanished, energy imports dried up, factories stopped operating, and the one system that held North Korean society together, the public distribution system, which had fed the entire population through centralized state rations since the 1950s, began to disintegrate. By the mid-1990s, the country was in freefall. The famine that followed, known inside North Korea as the Arduous March, killed somewhere between 600,000 and 1 million people, nearly 5% of the entire population. According to some sources, the number is even higher, 3.5 million. Entire villages emptied. People ate grass, bark, anything they could find. State officials in some regions quietly stopped distributing what little remained, hoarding resources for the politically loyal. The central government did not acknowledge what was happening. It did not mobilize relief. It simply let people die. And then it staged military parades. And in doing so, it destroyed something it could never rebuild: the social contract. For decades, the regime's legitimacy rested on one basic promise: submit completely, and the state will provide for you. Food, housing, security. The moment that promise collapsed, The moment the state stopped delivering rations and people were left to survive entirely on their own, the psychological hold of the regime began to fracture in ways no surveillance apparatus could fully repair. And the tool ordinary citizens used to survive would change everything. When the state stopped feeding people, people fed themselves. Informal markets, called Jang Madang, began appearing across the country. Citizens traded goods, smuggled products, and worked for cash in direct defiance of a system designed to eliminate all private economic activity. It wasn't ideology, it was hunger. But the consequences ran far deeper than food. At first, the regime tolerated them. It had no choice. But what started as survival quickly became something far more dangerous, a parallel economy, one the state didn't control. Entrepreneurs emerged, traders accumulated wealth, entire supply chains developed along the Chinese border. A new class of North Koreans, known as Donju, the masters of money, quietly accumulated influence outside any official structure. In some regions, the Donju effectively became the real economic authority, while the state apparatus would collect bribes to look the other way. And for the first time in North Korean history, large parts of daily economic life operated beyond the government's reach. The state hadn't just lost its monopoly on food, it lost its monopoly on survival itself. And that changed how people thought. Because when you no longer depend on the state to eat, you start to see the state differently. Not as a provider, not as sacred authority, but as an obstacle, something to navigate, something to bribe. That shift in consciousness was a ticking time bomb, and information made it detonate faster than anyone expected. As cross-border trade expanded along the Chinese frontier, something else started flowing into the country, the outside world. Smuggled USB drives carrying South Korean dramas, movies, and K-pop began circulating through the same networks that moved black market goods. Portable media players allowed people to watch foreign content in private homes, behind closed curtains. South Korean slang began quietly appearing in everyday conversation. And what North Koreans saw shattered the foundational myth of the regime. The state spent 70 years telling people that South Korea was a land of poverty and misery, a puppet state propped up by American imperialism. What the USB drive showed was something else entirely. Prosperous cities, modern lives, ordinary human emotions expressed freely, without fear, people laughing without anyone watching. Research conducted with North Korean defectors has found a direct correlation. The more exposure to South Korean media, the greater the decline in trust toward the Kim leadership. It's not just a cultural preference shift, it's what social scientists call relative deprivation. People see what the outside world has and can't unsee it. That gap between the propaganda they were raised on and the reality visible on a 4-inch screen becomes impossible to close. And once that gap opens, ideology starts to look less like truth and more like a lie someone is being paid to maintain. Kim Jong-un understood this threat. In 2020, he passed the Reactionary Ideology and Culture Rejection Law, making the distribution of South Korean media punishable by death. Public executions followed. Smugglers were shot in front of crowds. An entire new surveillance infrastructure was built specifically to hunt down foreign content. And still, it spreads. Which brings us to the generation that may already be beyond Kim's reach. North Koreans born in the 80s and 90s have no memory of a functioning state rationing system. They grew up in markets. They learned to survive by working around the regime, not with it. Researchers studying defectors from this group describe a population that is more individualistic, more risk-tolerant, and more openly skeptical of official ideology than any generation in North Korean history. They call this cohort the Jang Madang generation. And what makes them dangerous, from Kim's perspective, isn't that they're staging protests or organizing resistance. It's something subtler and harder to fight. They simply don't believe anymore. They see a regime not as a sacred authority, but as a shakedown operation. Officials aren't revered, they're negotiated with. Rules aren't obeyed, they're priced. South Korean slang, fashion, and customs aren't just cultural imports, they're acts of quiet, daily rejection that the state has no idea how to stop. One defector described it to researchers this way. The older generation feared the regime. The Jang Madang generation manages it. It's a profound distinction. You can suppress a population that fears you, but you cannot easily govern one that has simply decided that you are irrelevant. As the older generation of true believers dies out, Kim Jong-un is increasingly ruling over a country that's quietly stopped buying what he's selling. If you want to understand how powerful regimes begin to unravel before the world even notices, be sure to subscribe to Fall of Nations. Because what comes next in this story is something that no one in Pyongyang wants to admit. Kim Jong-un has not been passive in the face of all this. He has fought back. Hard. Border crackdowns intensified sharply during COVID-19, sealing the frontier with unprecedented force. Surveillance systems were upgraded. Smugglers caught distributing foreign media have faced public execution. The Dongju were hit with new restrictions on private business. In 2025, North Korea has ordered all private businesses operating in state-owned rented spaces to be absorbed into the national commercial network by the end of the year. And in 2024, Kim launched his flagship economic initiative, the 20x10 Regional Development Policy, a plan to build modernized industrial facilities in 20 cities every year for the next 10 years, designed to close the growing gap between Pyongyang and the impoverished provinces. It was supposed to signal that the state was back in business, that it could build, that it could provide again. But early reports tell a different story. North Korean sources in 2025 describe new buildings sitting empty and non-functional because the country still lacks reliable electricity or fuel to run them. A newly constructed bathhouse in Chongpyeong County, built as a showpiece of the program, had to shut down within 2 hours of its grand opening when the power was cut. A bathhouse. 2 hours. And this is the trap that Kim cannot escape. You destroy the markets and millions lose access to food because the state no longer has the capacity to feed the population on its own. You allow the markets to continue and the regime loses ideological control one transaction at a time. Either direction leads further down the same slope. The system is slowly strangling itself. But there's another dimension to this story, one that lives not in the streets of Pyongyang, but behind closed doors in Kim's inner circle. Kim Jong-un doesn't just maintain power through fear, he has to buy it. The loyalty of the military leadership, the party apparatus, the security apparatus, all of it flows through a patronage network funded by an organization known as Office 39, a secretive bureau that manages the Kim family's foreign currency reserves through a portfolio of criminal enterprises, counterfeiting US dollars, narcotics production, and increasingly state-sponsored cybercrime. In 2025, North Korean hackers linked to the Lazarus Group, operating under direct state authority, stole just over $2 billion in cryptocurrency, the most destructive year of North Korean crypto theft ever recorded. The Bybit exchange alone was hit for $1.5 billion in a single attack in February of 2025, a sophisticated operation that manipulated the platform's interface to trick its CEO into authorizing a fraudulent transfer. According to Chainalysis, North Korean actors now account for roughly 60% of all global cryptocurrency theft by value. This is not hacking for profit in the conventional sense. This is a government running a criminal enterprise to pay its own operating costs. But even this has its limits, because the patronage system only functions as long as the elite believe their loyalty will be rewarded, and not punished anyway. And the purges of Kim Jong-un's own tenure have made one thing brutally clear. In 2013, he executed his own uncle, Jang Madang, one of the most powerful figures in the regime, in a public trial driven by competition over foreign exchange revenues. In 2017, his half-brother Kim Jong-nam was assassinated with a nerve agent in a Malaysian airport. These were not signs of strength. These were signs of terror operating inside the system itself. The elite that keeps Kim in power knows what happened to Jang. And that knowledge creates a quiet, pervasive dread that no amount of luxury goods can fully suppress. The court stays loyal until the moment loyalty becomes more dangerous than defection. And then there's the succession question, the one that could unravel everything. Kim Jong-un is in his early 40s. He's been grooming his teenage daughter, Kim Ju-ae, for eventual succession, staging her appearances at missile launches, military reviews, and strategic events with increasing deliberateness. Analysts noted her elevated profile at a major party congress in early 2026 as a signal that the succession timeline is accelerating faster than previously assumed. But North Korea is a deeply patriarchal, Neo-Confucian military culture. A female successor would face resistance from a generation of generals and party old guard that have never answered to a woman's command. Kim's own sister, Kim Yo-jong, already one of the most powerful figures in the country, represents a potential rival center of gravity that could fracture the elite at exactly the worst possible moment. But the deeper problem, though, isn't gender, it's lineage. The Kim dynasty's legitimacy rests entirely on what the regime calls the Paktu bloodline, a mythology of revolutionary purity tracing back to Kim Il-sung's guerrilla campaigns on sacred Paktu Mountain. Touch this myth, and the entire ideological architecture will tremble. But here's the time bomb buried underneath all of it. Kim Jong-un's mother, Ko Yong-hui, was born in Japan to ethnic Korean parents. Under North Korea's own Songbun classification system, that places her in what the regime designates as the hostile class, people considered ideologically suspect. The regime has spent decades erasing her history from every official record. But in the age of Jang Madang generation, where information moves on drives and through encrypted networks, that secret has already started leaking. And if it ever breaks widely, if the elite or the population fully absorb that the supreme leader is the son of a woman from the hostile class, the founding mythology of the Kim dynasty does not simply weaken, it vanishes overnight. Now, for all of this, Kim still has one card left to play, and he's been playing it as hard as he can: Russia. Since 2023, North Korea has transformed itself into one of Vladimir Putin's primary arms suppliers, feeding Russia's war machine in Ukraine at a scale that has genuinely stunned Western analysts. By July of 2025, South Korea's Defense Intelligence Agency estimated that North Korea has shipped over 12 million artillery shells to Russia, with certain Russian units running almost entirely on North Korean munitions. Ukraine's own military intelligence assessed that without Kim's ammunition, Russian shelling of Ukrainian defensive lines would have been cut roughly in half. Pyongyang also deployed between 11 and 15,000 of its own soldiers to fight alongside Russian forces, gaining in return something arguably more valuable than payment: real-world combat experience and access to advanced Russian military technology it never could have obtained otherwise. In return, Kim received advanced military technology, oil, food shipments, and a rare economic lifeline. North Korea's economy grew an estimated 3.7% in 2024. A figure almost unheard of in recent North Korean economic history. Now, last year, its GDP was also roughly 3.4%. But look, this is life support, not a cure. The Russian partnership does nothing to reverse 30 years of market erosion. It does nothing to rebuild the credibility of a regime whose youth have stopped believing in its founding myths. It does nothing to fix the hollow infrastructure failing under the 20-by-10 policy. The shells keep the core economy solvent, but they don't rebuild what 3 decades of decay have destroyed. And by late 2025, even that stream was narrowing, with Ukraine's military intelligence reporting that North Korea had more than halved its shell shipments to Russia as domestic stockpiles began running dangerously low. The lifeline itself is shortening. So here is where we land. North Korea's system was built to last forever. 3 generations of dictatorship, total surveillance, borders sealed tighter than almost anywhere on Earth. A population kept in enforced ignorance, dependent on the state for everything from food to their own identity. But the forces that made that system work are gone. The state no longer feeds people. Markets do. The information wall no longer holds. The generation raised to believe in the Kim dynasty is being replaced by one that never did. The patronage system that holds the elite loyalty together runs on cybercrime and arms deals, not on the foundations of a functioning state. And the nuclear weapons that make the outside world hesitate to act are the one thing keeping a hollowed-out structure from being challenged externally. The nuclear program is not a sign of strength. It's a sign of how little else remains. Collapse doesn't always look like revolution. In fact, it rarely does. It does look like a bathhouse shutting down 2 hours after it opens. It does look like empty factories with no electricity. It looks like a young woman in Pyongyang knowing the words to a South Korean song she is legally forbidden to hear. It looks like a system designed to be invincible, hollowing out from the inside, one quiet act of disbelief at a time. Kim Jong-un may still rule North Korea today. He still commands nuclear weapons, a massive standing army, and the most comprehensive surveillance state on Earth. But the system that built him, the one that his grandfather constructed and his father maintained and he inherited, may already be past the point of no return. The question isn't whether the slow collapse will continue. The question is what the world is actually prepared for when the hollow tree finally falls. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think Kim Jong-un can do to reverse this trajectory? Or has the collapse already crossed a line that he can't walk back? Subscribe to Fall of Nations for the deep dives into the stories reshaping our world, because the next one is already in motion.